So this has been a real dream and a true honor to arrange with everyone at the American Cinematheque and internally here at the archive. And we're thrilled to get this series started here tonight with the first two feature films by John Sayles. So to say a few words to kick off this night properly, I'd like to now invite onto the stage the brilliant, the multi-talented, and the prolific American independent filmmaker, John Sayles.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I do want to thank the UCLA Archive, especially for independent filmmakers, where your distributor tends to go out of business 2 or 3 years after you make your movie, and then that library is bought by another distributor that goes out of business, then that is bought by another distributor that goes out of business. It's really important to get your film somewhere where it's going to be kept and available. And we've just had a great time working with them on a bunch of our films, and they have all of our film elements from the various movies we've made. What you're going to see tonight was originally shot in 16 millimeter and then blown up. And one thing you may notice, if you have any sense of space, is that we thought it might get on TV, so we actually didn't shoot it in the Academy ratio. And then when it was blown up, they said, well, you got to get rid of some top and some bottom, or all top or all bottom. So there's some very strange compositions that should not be blamed on the cinematographer. This was really before people were regularly making independent films. I had some kind of pioneers to think about. John Cassavetes comes to mind immediately. Melvin Van Peebles had made a couple films at this point, but it was really just kind of, I was in a theater group and knew a bunch of good actors who were turning 30, and Jeffrey Nelson, who ran was the producer of the theater we were in, said, well, we know so many good actors. I was starting to make some money as a screenwriter for Roger Corman, and I had the whopping sum of, I think, $30,000 in the bank at the same time, and that's what we got it in the can for. We later added another $10,000 to blow it up to 35. And I had 5 weeks to shoot. I'd acted with many of the people in the movie before. Some were just friends, some remained actors, some didn't. And we got surprised in that we actually got some offers of theatrical distribution. It took about a year to get it onto screens. It played for maybe a week or two in New York and didn't do very well. And the distributor, who was actually mostly an exhibitor in Seattle, took it back and redid the campaign. And then the second time that it came out, a few months later, it kind of caught on. And there were a bunch of movies that came out right about that time. And that idea that you could make a film in America that was not a studio film, and that it could get seen by people in a movie theater, and it might even make a profit if it didn't cost, started to catch on. This is before the Sundance Film Festival and things like that. And it's very much of a film of its time. None of us, crew or cast or director, had ever made a feature film before. So there was a lot of on-the-job training and really not a lot of time to shoot it, and it was really a lot of fun. And I will be back to do a Q&A at the end of it, and then if any of you want to stay for Leanna, that's a cool movie too. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. It's John Sayles. I'm Mark Olsen with the Los Angeles Times. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. John, the movie just played so warmly tonight to the audience. It's so interesting. It doesn't feel dated in the least. It still feels very present, Why do you think that is? How do you feel about sort of like the way the movie plays to contemporary audiences?
You know, I think that in most movies you kind of hang with the characters. They are of their time. Some things haven't changed much. You know, I don't know. You know, I think that, you know, people kind of hang out with the characters and feel like, okay, yeah. One thing I always trying to do is have a way into the movie for different kinds of people. So I know for some people, Chip the Dip, the guy who's, you know, kind of squarer than them, that was their way in. And, you know, for some of the women, one of the female characters was their way in. And so I think some of it is there's a lot of people, and so there's a lot of ways in.
And now, when you made this film, I mean, it's your first film as a director, but at that point in your life, you had already published 3 books of fiction. You had been a theater director, and of course, you'd been writing screenplays for Roger Corman, like The Howling and Piranha. Did it feel like a natural sort of step for you to direct a movie? What made you want to make your own movie?
You know, I certainly growing up, I saw more movies and TV than I read books, even though I like to read books. But you know, you don't have to raise money and hire people to write a book, and you know, I didn't go to film school, so it wasn't even that easy to rent a movie camera in those days. The places kind of looked at you funny, and you know, so do you know how to use this thing? And so it just seemed like, well, this is something that we could do. I know so many good actors. I had acted with most of these people, you know, directed a little bit, but mostly acted with them. You know, probably David Strathairn and Gordon Clapp, who are in this, are the best known. Gina Davis was in our company. It was her first job, and I wrote the movie that I could make at that time with the limited experience I had, and I wrote the movie for the budget. So, you know, it's kind of the only time I've done that, where I figured, well, you know, most of the actors I know who aren't in the Screen Actors Guild yet, who are good, they're around 30, and so I'm going to make a movie about a bunch of people who are around 30, and that's kind of what the movie's going to be about. And we had acted up in North Conway where the movie was shot. We'd worked in that theater that you see. Most of the interiors were shot in this ski lodge that we used to live in, you know, during the summers because it wasn't being used. So we could put people up for about $1.50 a night. And I don't think we shot more than 5 miles away from that thing. So it was a movie that was actually very efficient to make for 5 weeks of, you know, crew and cast never having made a feature before. We actually had a lot of time to do it because no time was lost in travel. You know, you have a call sheet on a movie, and our call sheet was on the bulletin board in the lobby of the ski lodge. And it would basically say, here are the scenes we might shoot tomorrow. And I would get up, and depending on the weather, we would shoot one of those 3 scenes. People were told to you know, bring the kind of clothes that you would wear to a weekend reunion. And so everybody's wearing their own clothes. We didn't have a costume department, or nobody's wearing makeup, so we didn't have a makeup department. And, you know, we had a 7-person crew. And I think a nice thing was that I didn't have to pretend I knew anything because nobody else knew anything either.
But now, given the work that you'd been doing in Hollywood, why was it that you wanted to make this kind of a movie, to make something that was so kind of naturalistic? It would seem to me it would have been very easy for you, the way that Joe Dante or Jonathan Demme did, to have just made a movie for Roger Corman.
You know, I just felt like, you know, I may only get to do this once. So a lot of people are making genre movies, and I like writing them and I like going to them, but I don't necessarily want to make one. So if I'm only going to get to do it once, why not make a movie that is about what I see in life and have never seen on the screen? You know, and those particular people I hadn't seen on the screen in that particular situation, I hadn't seen on the screen.
And then you made the movie for about $40,000.
Yeah, about 30 out of pocket, and then another 10 to blow it up.
And now, was there any? I mean, the obvious precedent for that is John Cassavetes, but was he in fact an inspiration? What was it that made you want to spend your own money on making a movie?
Because nobody else is going to give me any money. That's and I really thought, well, geez, when's this going to happen again? Roger Corman was in he was a signatory to the Writers Guild then, so I was getting $10,000, which was the Writers Guild minimum at that time. He later was not a signatory to it, so people weren't getting paid that much. But I had written 3 pictures for him, and I had sold a short story collection and a novel at that point. So I had this much money. I just didn't know I was going to continue to make money that way. And it just seemed like, well, this will be really cool to do. Also, a lot of my models were people who had written their way into being direct, Walter Huston, John Huston kind of writers who then became directors. And when I would talk to people out here about, well, I'd like to direct someday, they said, well, what do you have to show? And this was kind of, well, I'll at least have, even if it doesn't get released, I'll have something to show. There may be 2 scenes that are really good that I'll be able to show. So there was that kind of just experimental thing. So there wasn't a lot of pressure on us. Shooting 16 millimeter, we were up in New Hampshire. Probably the biggest expense in the whole budget was film stock. And so we didn't want to over-order film stock. So every couple days, film stock would come in cans to 6,000 salad balls, which you see which was, the bus stop as well. And a couple times we almost ran out of film in the bar scene. We were getting really short on film stock. So I learned a lot. I mean, there's a scene where you're cutting from JT who's singing around at the bar at night. And I realized, oh, geez, that's a song, and I want to be able to cut back to him, but I don't want it to be the same angle every time. And so we actually had 2 camera bodies. Our DP and our operator had brought a 16 millimeter body. And so I had one on a little piece of track and the other on sticks and with a zoom lens on. And I said to the guy who was singing, we're not going to do this too many times. So, try to do it. And he had written the song, so he knew it. And I had 2 sticks. And because we were going to run out of film, I was worried about, covering this thing. And I just said to the operators, I said, okay, when I tap you twice on the leg, you start rolling. When I tap you once, you stop rolling and zoom in or track in a little bit. And so basically we covered the song with about 3 minutes and 10 seconds of film, and it's a 3-minute song, and I got 6 angles. So it was a little bit like, live switching. And, that stuff, I'm sure I could have learned it somewhere, but on the day, you just figure that kind of stuff out because of necessity.
And I've also heard you talk about how I think it was the first day of shooting, you did a tracking shot because, excuse me, you wanted to see how complicated or difficult it would be. Just
how much time it would take, yeah. And that was the last tracking shot in the movie. It just took a little longer, and I did it. Okay, well, luckily, the camera operator, Bill Idelot, was a much better handheld operator than I knew or he would admit. He had actually, he went to Dartmouth and he covered the football games and handheld there. And he used to work for a guy named Warren Miller who made skiing movies. And he used to film skiing downhill, bending down and shooting between his legs to guys slaloming behind him. So he's a really good handheld operator. So the volleyball game and the charades game, I got him to handhold because that was not a style back then, that kind of handheld style. And they were very nervous about it looking shaky. I mean, he turned out to be a really good operator. So I got a little movement that way. But quite honestly, one of the movies I had in mind when I made it was Nashville. Robert Altman's Nashville, and I felt like, okay, I'm probably not going to get to move the camera much, just on this budget. How can I have a reason to cut? Because that's the other way that you kind of move the eye and move the audience forward. And I felt, well, what if I have a lot of characters and I can cross-cut between them? So this is a movie where a lot of the transitions are verbal transitions. somebody says, well, what about Jeff? And then the next thing you see is David Strathairn's character saying, Jeff, kind of, hokey, but I didn't know that I was going to be able to do visual transitions. The dissolves in the movie, some of them are kind of funky because at the laboratories in those days, if you shot 16, the lab only offered dissolves in multiples of 8. And you didn't get to see them. There was no digital or anything like that. So you had to just guess, 16, 24, 48, and you had to pay each time they did that. And so I just kind of counted off 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's a 64. And then that's what it is in the movie. And you didn't get a second chance.
And now, similar to Nashville, I mean, as you said, you have a lot of characters, but one of the things I think the movie does remarkably well is that you get the sort of individual storylines of the characters, and then this also a sense of kind of the larger arc of like all of their stories. There's like a big story happening at the same time. And is that something that you kind of grappled with in writing the movie, or was that more like in production and in editing?
No, it's there wasn't much that I cut out of this movie. It's pretty much in the writing, and it's something that I had done in my fiction as well. Most of my novels have multiple characters in them and multiple points of view. The point of view here doesn't change that often. It stays pretty omniscient, but you hang with different people. One of the things that I kind of spurred me to do this particular thing is right around that time, as we shot this in 1978, there had been a bunch of articles in like Time magazine and Newsweek about, all those 60s radicals are, they're starting to work for banks and stuff like that, and, happily selling out. And that just was not true of the people that I knew. Almost all the men that I knew were actually downwardly mobile. They were choosing careers, teaching or, working with alcoholics or whatever, where they were going to make less money than their fathers did. At the same time that the women were tending to have careers. And I thought that was interesting. And just in general, I knew a lot of people who had been in Vista, and the world had not turned out the way we wanted it to turn out. And I was interested, well, how do people deal with that? What's the next step, and do you get disillusioned? Do you, give it up? Do you go work for a bank or whatever? And the people that I knew were trying to hold on to those ideals.
And now, there's a way in which the, people often like to reference The Big Chill when they're talking about this movie. And I mean, I've heard you say to you, one of the big differences is this film really isn't concerned with selling out. In a way, it's a hopeful movie.
The Big Chill is called The Big Chill for a reason. It's about people grappling with this hard thing of, have we lost our ideals, or did we never have them in the first place? And these are people who are, they're not making as much money and they don't drive as nice cars, but they are trying to go forward with those same ideals.
But now, as you've moved on in your career, you've grappled with so many different genres. You've made seemingly so many different kinds of movies and stories. I've heard you say that all your movies are personal to you, but they're not autobiographical. And in a movie like this in particular, I think it's very tempting to want to look for you in the movie. Like, which character is the you there? And would people find one?
No, not necessarily. One of the actors, because I always write bios for all the characters, and even in my first movie I did this, and one of the actors came to me and having read the bio and said, "How did you know that I've always felt like everybody's second best friend?" And I said, "I didn't know that about you, but that's the character you're playing." So I'm not especially autobiographical. I'd say the movie that's closest to my own experience is Baby It's You, in the size of the city and the ethnic makeup of the high school and stuff like that. But one of the things that interests me about, a lot of my movies and books are about trying to figure out what can possibly be going through people's heads if they're acting this way, and what's the situation. And one of the things that's interesting is to start with, well, what is there to be in their head? Is this movie before the women's movement? Is it before Freud? Is it before capitalism? Is it before people knew the world was round? And that really affects what people might possibly be thinking. And you have to start with that, and you think about that from the ground zero, and then you build a character, and then within that of what you could know is how old are they educated, are they not, what class are they from, what color are they on, what were the attitudes about that. So there's all this stuff that goes into that. Now, for my first movie, talking to these actors, all of them knew somebody like that. They were comfortable. They were the age of the characters they were playing. They weren't playing people, in the distant past. And so that was an easier way to start.
And now, at this time, when you made the movie, there really wasn't an art house film circuit. I mean, Sundance didn't exist yet. FilmX existed here in Los Angeles. What did you think the life of this movie was going to be?
I thought we might get on PBS somehow, because they had a kind of series where people were making American short stories into like 1 hour things. I thought, well, maybe. So really, what was happening, and it kind of was the luckiest thing for us as filmmakers, is it was right at the point when people were starting to be able to, very shortly after this, people got home video. And calendar houses, which every June would play the 400 Blows, were starting to realize our audience has seen it a bunch of times, 400 Blows. Maybe we have to program something else. And they were going from being calendar houses into open run houses. And therefore they needed, new movies. And some people don't read subtitles. And so what can we get from Britain or the United States? And there were probably 5 or 6 non-Hollywood distributors around, and probably the year Secaucus 7 came out, there were 12 independent movies made in this country. So they would look at, the head of the company would look at anything with sprocket holes. And so, we now Sundance gets 2,000 feature films every year. There's a lot more competition now.
And now, did it work? Like, do you feel like you got from making this movie what you wanted from the experience of making it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, actually, what's happened in my career is not all our movies have broken even. Some of them have made a little profit. A few made pretty good profit, but nothing mega, But I've gotten to write for other people in every genre because of stuff that I've made. So writers get, typecast, and directors get typecast just like actors do. Joe Dante, who made Piranha, he only got not only horror movies offered to him, but aquatic horror movies. So, he got offered Jaws 3, People Nothing, and Orca 2, and things like that. And he hates the water. So, but luckily, because then I got to, make a movie that was about, a gay woman. I started getting some of those offers, and I made a baseball movie, so I get sports offers and stuff like that. So it's been good. The movies I've made have been good advertising for my writing, and kind of vice versa. So the biggest compliment that we still get is, even though it's almost impossible to raise money to make a movie, when I do, really good actors say they'll work for scale because it's a good part and they've seen another movie of mine. They say, oh, okay, I could be in one of those.
And do you feel like in some way you're always like staying one step ahead of getting typecast? Like the fact that you make so many different kinds of movies makes it hard for people to pigeonhole you.
Yeah, well, lately it's because I don't make many movies, and so it's like, oh, is he still trying to make movies? So you don't get pigeonholed if you don't work for 3 or 4 years in between movies. But yeah, it's I've just been lucky, and I've gotten to write in a lot of different genres, and that's fun. There's certain genres I'm not interested, so I haven't written in them, but got to write gangster movies and westerns and horror movies and romances and a lot of historical stuff.
And is there a big distinction for you in between, say, writing one of your novels and writing a screenplay? Like when an original idea comes to you, how do you decide what that story is going to be?
Well, sometimes just the scale of it, or my new novel, Yellow Earth. There's not a oil company that's out there fracking who's going to come and invite me to watch them put up rigs and then make them look bad in a movie. I couldn't afford to do the stuff that is, portrayed in Yellow Earth. So sometimes just practically, there's no way we're going to be, or the scale of my last novel, which, A Moment in the Sun, which would make a great 50 to 100 episode miniseries, but it's 1,000 pages long and it's all over the globe and stuff like that. There's just no way. Sometimes I've taken a small section of a novel and expanded that into a screenplay, but and sometimes it just seems like this should be a book or this should be a movie. I've written another novel since Yellow Earth, and quite honestly, it's based on a screenplay that I wrote years ago that we were never able to raise the money for. And then I just thought, what a good story. I should do something with it.
And now to talk a little bit about the second feature tonight, Lianna, your second film. You actually wrote this screenplay before you had written Secaucus Sediment?
Yeah, and it just seemed like nobody's going to give us the money to make this, and I don't think I can make it for the money that I have. And so it was kind of sitting there. And then we had this idea that, oh, good, we'll make it for, $800,000 and we'll make it in 35 millimeter. And then almost a year later, we said, well, maybe we'll make it for $300,000 in 16 millimeter. And we went from having, we'll go to a studio or a small, distribution company to, okay, does your aunt have some money that she might, and actually Karen Trott, one of the actors in this, who's not in Leanna, actually gave us like $1,500 to, and we pieced together between some of the money we made back on Secaucus 7 and various friends and family, and then some people we didn't know. I think the biggest piece was like a $50,000 investment. We pieced together $300,000 and made another movie.
And now, can you talk a bit about the inspiration for the story of the movie? Because I feel like if Lianna came out today, so much of the conversation around it would be about you as a straight man making this woman about a woman's lesbian awakening. What was it that was the inspiration for you to want to tell that story?
Yeah, actually, two things kind of came together. I knew a lot of people who, their relationships were breaking up, and some of them were married and some of them weren't married. But the real factor in what kind of breakup it was whether they had children or not. And if they had children, it was not such an easy breakup. And they were going to be in each other's lives forever. Whereas the people who didn't have kids, it was have a nice life, goodbye, we'll try to avoid each other for a couple weeks, but then we're going to run into each other, and so what? So that started it. And then at the same time I was thinking about that, there had been a couple big cases in the news of women who had been married, had kids, broke up with their husbands, got custody of the kids, but then when they fell in love and started living with another woman, their husbands brought them back into court, and the judges just said, no, this is terrible for the kids. The husband's getting custody. And I thought, well, that's an interesting situation where the mother would be the one who's locked out, is on the outside looking in. And then I felt like, well, how far into that world can I? Well, let's go with somebody who is very new at it. So this is not somebody who's known this about herself for a long time or thought about this for a long time. And then the other part of the story is somebody who got married right out of college, married her professor, and really has never been on the job and relationship market. And all of a sudden, she's in her 30s with 2 kids, and she's got to think about dating and what do I do for a living and how do I make a living. And I knew a lot of women who'd gotten into that situation as well. So a bunch of things came together. Well, an interesting thing is I wrote a movie for John Frankenheimer that was eventually called The Challenge. And Scott Glenn and Toshiro Mifune were the stars of it. And I was in Kyoto where they were going to shoot the movie, and Scott Glenn came down, and I talked to him, and he had just been in, and he asked me what I'd done, and I explained the plot of this movie, which had not opened yet. And his last movie was Personal Best, which was the other gay-themed, women-themed movie that came out that year. And I asked him, so what's that movie about? And he said, track and field. And then I realized later he's the coach, and in his character's head is track and field. I don't care what these girls do, outside of my area of interest.
And yet, for so many people, I mean, this was similar to what you were saying about Secaucus 7. This was a story that was really not on screen. This was a story that
I hadn't seen it before.
People were not seeing.
Yeah. I mean, usually, there's a joke in Leanna about one of the best known books, within gay literature at that time was called The Well of Loneliness, and I thought, well, that's some people's experience, but there's other experiences within there.
And can you talk about casting Linda Griffiths, who plays the star of the movie? It is just a tremendous performance from her.
Yeah, Linda really kind of came up at the last minute. We had some other people who we had an interesting thing where a very well-known actress came in, and our casting director said, well, you'd be surprised at who just kind of showed up. And, she wants to read for this part. And she was just in a really hot movie. And she says it's the best material she's read, in years. And I said, okay, well, we've got one person before her. And then the casting director came in and said, okay, here, a weird thing happened. She's living with her agent, and her agent just called and said she's not coming in because she really didn't respond to the material. And she's still out there. So do we tell her that, or do we let her come in and audition first and then deal with her agent? And I said, just tell her. And then she just went home. And another actress said yes, and then at the last minute got nervous. And, it was a big deal then to play somebody gay, whether you were gay or not. And so we had somebody who at the last minute dropped out. And then we went and saw Linda in this play where she played Trudeau and his wife in the same one-woman show. I thought, well, she's good, even if she is Canadian. And and we cast her, and she was great. Had not been in a movie before.
But I've heard you refer to the part as frustrating, in that the character, she's hard to read. She doesn't really know what she wants. Mm-hmm. Was that difficult, both for her to perform and also for you to direct, to try? Like, I don't know how you direct someone to be uncertain.
Well, I mean, I think like at the end of the first, Linda said to me, okay, so am I miserable, really miserable, or suicidal? Because we were shooting a lot of those scenes. And I said, really, it's moment to moment. This is so new to this person. And that's what that's what's going through your head. Is this going to turn out all right? Is this really real? Am I just in love with this woman, or am I interested in another woman? What's this going to do to my kids? I want to get my kids back and am I going to lose custody of my kids? All this is really, really new. And so it was a difficult movie in that way, is there's always a subtext. There was always, it's a difficult thing to play a whole movie. My last movie, Lisa Gay Hamilton plays somebody who for most of the movie, her son is being held as a captive and somebody sent her his ear, and she said, I've got to play everything like they might kill my son, and I said, well, every scene that's going to be there, but there's other things you have to do during this, and some of your focus has to be on that. Don't ever forget that other thing. But you can't play everything like you're right at the moment when your son's going to die in 2 seconds. It's a hard thing to do, to have that kind of subtext all the time.
And now, as much as the movie is about her emotional reality, as you do in so many of your movies, her economic reality is so present. Like you were saying, mm-hmm. She has to get an apartment, get a job. And that's just something we don't see a lot in American movies mm-hmm. at all. Like for you, is that something you're conscious of? Like, are you always thinking about inserting those things in your work? Or to you, is it just a natural part of human drama?
It's interesting. Hitchcock and a lot of other people who made thrillers would have their characters be architects because nobody knows exactly what they do. They have a piece of paper and they wear a hard hat for 2 minutes, and people just figure, well, they could take a week off and have an adventure and nobody would miss them. But life doesn't stop for most people. And, one of my favorite things is the end of Goodfellas, when he's trying to make the spaghetti sauce and the helicopters are there and he's got to worry about maybe he's got to kill somebody that night or whatever. Life doesn't stop. and economic life doesn't stop. And if you don't have a job, you got to worry about, you got to make the rent, and yes, your kids, and it's the reality for an awful lot of people is, if I lose I hate this job, but if I lose it, am I going to get another one? I've got kids or somebody else, depends on me. And, aliens are invading. Can I take the day off? Or, are they not going to excuse me because those aliens just blew up the White House?
And now, Lianna is a kind of a bigger scale than Secaucus 7. It was more expensive. You have kind of more locations. When you were making the movie, did it feel more ambitious? Did it feel like a step forward?
Yeah, we had tracking shots, more than one. We had a few more employees. We did use our home as an office. I did let the grips take my car, and it was a picture vehicle. And don't ever do that. When they say they can put the front door back on, they can't really. So yeah, it was a step up. It was still really difficult, and we didn't have that much time to do it. I think we had 5 weeks again. Brother from Another Planet, it was only 4, so we had even less time to do that. So, and I've made, I think, 4 movies in 4-week periods. So, it's you kind of feel like this is how much time we have. This is how much time I can give the actors. And the most important thing that you do as a director with actors is actually an acting job, which is to make them feel like you're not in a hurry. So that they're never worried about blowing a line or the sun's going down or anything like that. And while you're kind of going, oh God, we've only got 15 minutes before the sun's going to be down, you can't pass that on to the actors. And so, there were just more people to deal with.
And now, is that in particular, that idea of like not having the actors feel the pressure that you're feeling, did you have to make some mistakes to learn that? Or was it the fact that you yourself have some acting experience, you kind of knew that was a truth?
Yeah, I think the advantage that I had coming into, I didn't go to film school, but I had directed in theater. I had been an actor. And I had a feeling of what's going to help people. That's what I'm there. You don't teach people how to act. You direct their talent. And so a lot of what I was doing was just trying to help them. I gave them the bios beforehand, and some direction is really, can you do that again? Have all those same feelings, but try to hold them a little bit more. And then maybe the next time is, okay, let it all hang out, or don't let her push you around this time. Those simple kind of things. Don't change any lines, don't necessarily change your blocking, but there's a different emotion that's going to be pushing you forward in this thing. And that I was always very comfortable with.
And now one detail about this, Lianna in particular, that I'm so taken with, early in the film there's a scene in like a playground, and it in fact is the same playground in Hoboken where scenes from On the Waterfront were shot. And now, did you know that, or are there just like not that many playgrounds to shoot in?
There's not that many playgrounds to shoot in, And it was great to walk around Hoboken. Oh, there's the church where Carl Malden's church, and here's this, and there were a few people who had been extras in the film still around and stuff like that. And they had originally they were going to shoot over in Brooklyn, but that waterfront was so mobbed up that they got too many death threats, and so they came over to Hoboken and shot it.
And now, before we take a few questions from the audience, I'm just going to ask you one more question, which I'm going to jump forward a movie and ask you something about Baby It's You that's also going to be showing as part of the series. That was actually the first American film that was shot by the cinematographer Michael Ballhaus. He had been working in Germany with Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and this is before he went on to work with Martin Scorsese.
He actually had shot a movie before that for Peter Lilienthal, who's a Argentinian director, called Mr. Wonderful, with Joe Pesci before he got known, that never got a release. That was a nice little movie. So Michael was very, very new. His English was pretty good, not great. And somebody had seen that movie and recommended him. And I had seen a bunch of the Fassbinder movies that he had shot. Wonderful guy to work with.
And did you, for that movie in particular, did you feel like he was going to bring something bolder and like more style to the movie?
I just thought, well, here's a guy who, he's shot really low budget movies and they looked great. And I'm going to be working with a lot of very new actors. A lot of the kids who were in the movie had not been on screen before, and I'm going to need that time to work with the actors. And I just said to Michael, we're going to be working really fast. I'm going to tell you what the shots are at the beginning of the day, and so you do your best in the time that we have. And Michael was also a great operator. He's the best operator I ever worked with, and he and his assistant cameraman were like a U-boat crew because they spoke in German to each other, whispered in German to each other, and they never locked the camera off. So even if it was on a tripod, they never locked it down. And he would be, in German saying, "Go with the girl, go with the girl." The focus puller would, because Michael would feel what was hot in the scene, and I gave him that kind of freedom within the frame that I wanted. And also he was the first DP where if I said wide and low, his wide and low looked like my wide and low. And we didn't have video assist yet. So, when I would look through the camera, I'd say, yeah, that's wide and low. We never had to move the camera again.
Wow. And we have just a few minutes for some questions. Anybody? No? Oh, right there? Sure.
It's kind of a boring question. For Secaucus 7, you were talking about how the budget was low and you were ordering film just as you were shooting. Did you shoot on Kodak or did you shoot on something cheaper?
No, we shot on Kodak. Okay. But 16 millimeter is, it's not only cheaper because it's half the width, but you don't need as many feet.
Right.
So, several movies later, Silver City, I realized, geez, I don't think I can. We were still shooting on film, and I called Haskell Wexler up, and I said, "So Haskell, have you ever shot Super 16?" And which is a slightly wider version of it. And there was a little pause, and he said, "Me and two other guys invented it." So yes, the answer was yes. But yeah, I we used Kodak, and it was just before the ASA, which was the speed of the film, got to the point where you could light by eye. So it was still going around and with light meters and doing a lot of math in your head. So the scene on the living room floor, when you kind of the two kids make love on the floor and the camera lifts up and you see the other woman on the floor behind them and she's in focus too. We shot that in bright light and printed it down, and they had to go around with light meters of, this is 2 times hotter than this. And then about 2 movies later, Kodak came out with a stock that was, the ASA was so much higher that you could I could just go in and they could light it by eye. And they would still check it now and then, but I could see what it was going to look like. I didn't have to take the DP's word for, it's going to look good once we print it down, which was scary.
Thanks.
And we're going to have to take a break now before we run Lianna. And so everybody please join me in thanking John Sayles.
Thanks, everybody.